Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Director Services Select Committee meeting for Wednesday, March 11th, 2020. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the Coast Salish territory. And I would also like to welcome our newest alternate Director McNeil, and welcome alternate Director Sandhu and alternate Director Justice to today's committee meeting. And I will turn to our Corporate Services Officer for the next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
It's been moved. Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item number 2 is adoption of the minutes, and the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Directors Services Select Committee meeting of July 10th, 2010 be adopted.
It's been moved. Second. Any discussion? Motion carries.
Oh, yes, 2019, correct.
We'll correct that. 2020. Thank you. Next order of business.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next order of business arising from the minutes, there is none. Public input period.
Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment on today's agenda? And there is no one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegations, there are none. Correspondence, there is none. And then reports. Item R1 is a report from the Human Resources Division regarding position descriptions, and there is a recommendation before you.
Thank you. Do we want to have the recommendation on the floor or just, okay, we have it moved? Do we have a seconder? I don't see a seconder. Okay, it's been seconded. Any discussion? I'll start a list. Director Wilson.
I'm assuming that's the... I'm assuming that the recommendation is the one that's in front of us, the remuneration for the directors? No. Okay, in that case, I will go backwards.
Director Smith.
Thank you. Reading these descriptions, I find that they read more like a job description, and the description does encompass many of the activities that any good electoral area director would likely perform, or a board director. But it removes the discretion that a director would have in terms of deciding on how best to represent their residents. Once you put it on paper, it's an expectation. And I'd also like to know if these descriptions will have been looked at legally.
Thank you. Was that a question for staff? Yes. Thank you. Ms. Mohan.
Through the chair, I have not submitted these position descriptions for legal review. They have been through a rigorous staff review, so the CAO and the GM of Corporate Services, as well as the corporate officer, Angie Legault, we all sat down and looked at them from our relative understanding of legislation around the limitations and the powers that elected officials have, but I have not sent them for legal review.
Thank you. I have Director Stone, Kuhn, Morrison. No, Director Kuhn.
You say there was a review by staff. I find that actually kind of strange, because if it affects the area directors, how come staff discuss that? I think it should be the directors, shouldn't it?
Well, it's
I mean, it should come before the directors as a discussion point, not when it's all established and now we vote on it. I mean, we should have had input in it.
Director Kuhn, we did form this list, at the last Director Services meeting. We did it collaboratively So I think staff was just going from what we discussed there. If there's anything to add to the list, or did you notice?
No, I don't.
Okay, I have Director Morrison, Justice, Director Stone, did you want to be back? No, okay.
Yeah, it's the start of a long day. So in reviewing all of these items, and I go to attachment A, it's the electoral area director one, and I believe the same language is used in the municipal director, and it's under the time commitment and availability section. And I guess the challenge or the difficulty is that we have to meet certain thresholds and requirements as part of our qualifying for our benefits package, which makes perfect sense, I get it. But the line of particular concern in this issue is the role generally involves at least the equivalent time commitment of a part-time job. So that's the one under the electoral area director one, and, you know, that's actually pretty funny. Sad, but obviously we meet that requirement. I can't imagine someone who was even disinterested in performing the role, how they couldn't meet at least part-time. But I'm wondering if, and wonder what the committee thinks about something that might be a little more reflective of the time commitment other than at least the equivalent time commitment of a part-time job. Just throwing it out there. We know that there's a difference in time commitment from that of an electoral area director and a municipal director, yet it's the same language, if I'm not mistaken. So it would be nice if we could have some more reflective differentiation in that particular line. Any thoughts?
Ms. Mohan, did you want to comment on that, or? I did notice that as well, thanks.
Through the chair, yes, that line came up specifically because of the benefits eligibility requirement that we established when we introduced the benefits plan. So, but these are your position descriptions, and I'm taking direction from the group. And so, if you would like additional description of, you know, what is at least versus what is typical, that's fine. I would remind you that there is no requirement for any particular time commitment beyond the benefit eligibility, so it is highly discretionary. So there may be a way of expressing that it, you know, at a representative's discretion, they, you know, might put in more time. So I would be looking for direction from the committee if you want to flesh out that language. So.
I have Director Justice Yanni DiNardo, Stone, and then Toporotsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I was reading them, I was wondering whether any thought had gone into creating position descriptions for alternates. I'll just leave it at that.
Ms. Mohan.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, no, there was no thought given to a particular alternate's position description, although we acknowledge that recent events have prompted us to look at a number of different factors around alternates. And so it's certainly something we could incorporate. Right now, we're governed by, I think, you know, policy and bylaw in terms of when an alternate is, you know, how are they selected, when they fill in for the elected official, et cetera. And recently, there have been matters of compensation that have been discussed at board. So certainly that's something we can develop if it's the will of the committee. So.
Thank you. And Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was thinking the same thing as Director Morrison. I'm not sure the language, what we could put on it, but I would say as an electoral area director, it would depend on what you would call a part-time job, because it has to be true for people that want to apply for this, and I'm not sure it's transparent on the hours that you actually have to spend as an electoral area director. or that you could spend as an electoral area director, but there is a basic. So I'm not sure if we've flushed that out correctly or not. I don't think putting hours down would be useful, so maybe it, and then I'm not sure. I'll wait to hear from the rest of the committee. Thank you.
I agree, maybe I can step in here too. Maybe it could just be a wording that's at a minimum to perform the role, because there's no way to force somebody to put more hours in. So, Ms. Mohan, did you want to comment?
Through the chair, it does actually currently say at least, so that would be the minimum. And so the only thing I could suggest is that you make sort of a descriptive statement about what is often the case. So you could say often an elected official puts in a lot more time than this, or, you know, something that qualifies it as not being a requirement, but is still information for someone about what is often done. So you could use the words often, or at your discretion, you may find this position takes up a lot more of your time. You know, so you could preface a sentence with some kind of qualifier that way, and that would be my suggested approach if this isn't sufficient, so.
So, Director Yanni DiNardo, did you want to make a suggestion to complete that sentence? Or
I was
would
gonna
you look
wait-
for that part, Ms. Mohan, or would you be looking for us to do that now, or?
Through the chair, I guess if you wanted me to develop the language, I'd prefer to go away with it, because I hadn't prepared for this meeting. But that will delay this to the next meeting, just so you know. If you have a recommendation for me today, I'll take that as direction, and we can adopt them as that. But I didn't prepare something on that, so.
Okay. Director Yanni
I
DiNardo.
would just like it as direction, that we have some kind of wording, and let Ms. Mohan go back, and, because this particular motion isn't time sensitive.
Right.
It's, you know, something, but I think it's really important before the next election.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to refer it back to staff for that.
Okay, maybe we'll continue our discussion, we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would wonder if it's possible that, I don't think that disqualifies the statements that are already in here and the recommendation that's on the floor. I might suggest that we do a follow-on motion that directs staff to provide a more detailed preamble that reflects the actual time commitment. I think the challenge is that there's not a requirement, and we can't institute a requirement in a job description that says somebody must perform the level of duties. And again, it's really relative to the area that the director comes from and the expectations of the community and also the commitment level of the director. I would say that it's a full-time job. And I think that's very apparent to those of us that, you know, participate at the level that we think is necessary. But we've also experienced that it's very cyclical too. So one week might be 60 hours and the next week might be 25 and the next one might be another 60. So I was just looking through here and saying that, you know, adopting what is here and reflecting more on, you know, almost like a preamble to introduce the position doesn't really affect the position description. But, you know, if the committee wants to refer it back, it's an electoral area issue generally, I think. Based on the other descriptions, the chair, the committee chairs, and the municipal directors, I think those are pretty accurate. But I'll leave it up to the committee if they decide they want to refer it. I don't know if staff can just be directed to bring back that description, or if we want to refer the whole thing back. I just find it hard that we would be not have an agreed to position description, but then be considering remuneration for a position that we haven't agreed on the description for.
Sure, good point. Director Kuhn, I'll put you on the list. Next I have Toporowski, Smith, Morrison.
Thank you. Aaron just touched on some of the things that, talking about 60 hours versus 35 hours. And I'm just going to add that, you know, when we run for these positions, you're a politician and you can go to the grocery store for a jug of milk and be at the door for 45 minutes and not even make it into the store to buy your milk. So it's different for each area, and I know that when we're elected into these positions that our constituents think we're available all the time. there's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's Messenger, there's email, there's phones, and there's all of these different avenues that can reach us now. And, you know, compared to 10 years ago where you had to actually physically come to a meeting to voice your concern, and you could send an email or snail mail, as they call it now, get out a pen and paper and write to your elected official. And telephone was the other avenue too, but we didn't have voicemail. So I'm just looking at some of the suggested changes are good, and it is, the time commitment is something that I think some people that are thinking about running for these positions should be made aware of. So that's what I just want to say. Thanks.
Director Smith.
So I have a couple of sort of comments. One of the things on the attachment B, it says for the municipal directors, it says typical job duties. So we're not really a job, so I'm not sure that that's the right wording there. When the municipal directors come to the board, they're appointed by their own council. So as to what expectations we have of a description is a bit something that maybe we don't have a say in. It's more their council has the say in it, because their council is the one that appoints them. And so if all of a sudden North Cowichan appointed someone and they were not able to fulfill this job duties, would we then say, oh, their description, they don't qualify to be here at the table? So we need to be cautious of what wording and who we're directing this to, because we have no say in these people that we welcome to the table here from the municipalities. So I have concerns about that. If it says here that the municipal director's work put in part-time, then we also put in the same part-time to be at the table, but then we moved to our other hat of electoral area directors, where we put in another part-time job. So we really take the part-time job for the being part of the board, and then our part-time job of being electoral area directors, and you add them together and we have a full-time job. And as a new director, I had a learning curve, and I must admit that I thought that it would slacken a bit starting after the first year. But I find my calendar absolutely chock-a-block full, and it's like all week. It's 7 days a week. So I think as electoral area directors, we're definitely having to pull two loads when we're being both, and definitely under the description for electoral area directors, I don't think part-time is actually the correct word. Because if you went to tell somebody, I had a phone call the other day from someone who's thinking of running for Area H position, and I was, he asked how much time do I spend, and I said, well, it varies, you know, but it's 7 days a week, and it can be almost 24 hours a day, the amount of work that you can put in. So it's not something you can take lightly. So
Thank you. It's definitely as ambitious as you want to be in ways. Mrs. Mohan.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to respond to some of Director Smith's comments. So thank you very much. That word job duties is a typo. So I in our workshop and in my report, I explained that my starting place for developing the position descriptions was the job description template for our organization. And so that's just a hangover from that document. So I will remove that because it's not meant to be a job description. You're right. It's meant to be a position description. So thank you for that. With respect to sort of the aims of developing this were twofold. One was to provide information for candidates and for people considering the role, and the other was to form a basis for further discussion about compensation, so that there was an agreed upon kind of description of what the role entails. But this is not a document that is meant to be used to hold anybody's performance to light. the board has separate rules around attendance at meetings and how board members' performance is judged, and ultimately, your performance is judged by your constituents at the poll. So it's not meant to be any kind of document that would be used to govern someone's performance in the role. It's simply informational. So I just wanted to put you at ease about that. And with respect to the time commitment, I just want to reiterate that there's a lot of respect for how much time elected officials put in on their jobs. If they're municipal directors, they understandably would have duties in their municipality as well as their regional duties, and if you're an electoral area director, it's for your own area as well. So there's no desire to minimize the role. The issue is that it's very clearly not employment, and it's very clearly the time commitment is completely discretionary with respect, except with meeting attendance. There's some meeting attendance requirements, but it's otherwise completely discretionary. So while you may put in the time, you're not required to. It's entirely your choice and what your constituents demand. And so that makes it difficult to express in this document, because again, it's not meant to hold anybody's performance to account. So the idea here is just to give people a picture of what it looks like. And I think it's been already mentioned in the meeting that there is a place, an opportunity in describing the time commitment for some discretionary language, just to give a good picture of what the time commitment is without making it sound as if it's required. So.
I have Director Morrison, Kuhn, Stone. Oh, Mr. Crothers wants to
Thank you, Madam
comment.
Chair. Just further to Ms. Mohan's comments, we struggled, and I appreciate Director Kuhn's comments about staff, taking a cut at this. And really, our cut at it was looking at the legislative kind of responsibilities, making sure that that was all fine-tuned. But we did struggle with that language around what's required versus what is discretionary. And I think maybe separating it between requirements and expectations, because really a lot of it comes down to expectations. Staff can quantify the amount of work that we can reasonably expect a director to have to participate in meetings, to have to be at engagements. We understand over the course of a year what that requirement would be, and we could estimate what the requirement would be to review agenda materials and that kind of thing. But in terms of the rest of the work, that is really an expectation of your community and your constituents, and that varies from one director to another. But I think we might be safer to talk about it in terms of expectations rather than requirements, because this, as Ms. Mohan says, this isn't a job. You're complete. You don't even have to attend every committee meeting, but you have legislative requirements to meet to attend certain meetings. So if that might help, maybe we can use that language around expectations of both of the organization and of the constituents versus requirements.
Thank you, and thanks for waiting, Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And now I'm not sure exactly what to think, but I had some language that I thought might help, because I think that for the most part, the descriptions that I've seen so far pretty much meet what I would expect the staff to produce for us for the purposes of this meeting. I don't think there really needs to be any change in this except for, and I'm just going to toss this out there for consideration as adding to the end of that line, or perhaps another line, in just the electoral area section that would read something to the effect of, and can often involve activities equivalent to or exceeding a full-time position. And that I would move that. If there's a seconder, I would speak to it. Yeah.
It's been second. You may speak.
So I completely understand that there is no requirement in this. I think staff have done a good job in describing sort of the optional time commitment of this. But I also think about UBCM week and AVICC week and those times when you're living and breathing this more than full-time, and there can be those activities that elevate this to the equivalent to or exceeding a full-time position. And everybody's got their own ideas of what a full-time, part-time is. So I offer that as additional language to what's already here. It would be an amendment to what we have before us, and I think we might even be able to proceed to recommending to the board that this be approved with that addition. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Or would that be a separate amendment? It's on the amendment, yeah. Okay. And so I have Director Kuhn here and Director Stone, if you want to speak to the amendment. And Yanni DiNardo? Yes. Director Kuhn, please.
Yes, I would leave that sentence out totally. I don't think there's any need for us to point out as to exactly how much time is required for this position. In the first three sentences, the time commitment was already indicated. What I would like to see maybe as a replacement of that last sentence, that a certain amount of flexibility is required, and that the public might expect this and that or the other thing. And I think I would least the equivalent time of a part-time job, I would leave that all out. I think that's, yeah, I would just leave that.
I think there is mention of the hours being weekends or evenings, so you can kind of you can read into that for sure. Next, I have Director Stone.
Not to directly debate Director Kuhn's point, but the requirement for the benefits says that it's a minimum, I believe, 20 hours per week. And I think that that's reflected in that statement of at least part-time. If we don't make that commitment in the description, then we have difficulty saying that we fulfill the commitment for the benefits plan that we're all enrolled in. That being said, like I said, I'm not married to it, but I think with the amendment and the typo correction that was mentioned around the job piece, that I'm comfortable moving this forward so that we can move on to R2.
Thank you. And I have Director Yanni DiNardo and then Smith
On
to
the
call the
amendment.
question.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. On the amendment, I think I'm okay with that, because the reason why I really wanted this was mostly for the public and to move it forward for anyone that's wanting to take this job, so that it's honestly transparent, because over the years, it's hard to explain the job. And, yeah, not that it's employment, which is a really good explanation too. And, yeah, so I will be, but I also wondered from Ms. Mohan if that's accurate wording, if she felt comfortable with that wording, because she's the
Ms. Mohan?
wordsmith.
Thank you, through the chair. Instead of often, I thought maybe the word may. So may involve activities equivalent to or exceeding a full-time position. That would make me more comfortable, because it often's, yeah, a little more quantifiable. But
Yes.
other than that, I'm comfortable with
Okay,
that wording.
thank you so much. I'll be voting in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Smith.
I support the amendment.
So I will call the question on the amendment. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Are we ready to call the question on the motion as amended? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to our,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
for R2, I have Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've distributed a potential resolution for consideration by the committee upon review by our folks in finance. Apparently, there's supposed to be a fourth bullet that would read that the 2020 budget is amended by, can't read that word, director expenses by $100,000 and increasing operating transfer by $100,000. Mark, you're gonna have to read that. I can't read it writing.
Increasing directors' remuneration by 100,000 and increasing operating reserves transfer by 100,000.
And if there's a seconder, I'll speak to it.
It's been seconded.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This has come about, a number of directors had been having, individual discussions about some of the merits of what we've been discussing for, gosh, a year and a half now, I guess. And a couple of directors approached me and asked what what form would a resolution take? How could we go about doing it? What's the financial implications and the likes? And so upon that motivation, I guess, I contacted staff and crafted what I hope is a relatively simple resolution. And it covers a number of the aspects that we have been discussing over a period of time. You'll notice there's no reference to the benefits package, and that's very specific and intentional in this, in that was one of the areas that was charged to this committee last year that has been addressed, and most of us are very pleased with that. My understanding is that it is a somewhat challenging task to quantify the impacts. You can't really make an average value of what the benefits package would be. So this is strictly about the pay packet compensation, nothing to do with the benefits. And so the rationale here is that we're currently around 30 or just shy of 34,000. We've gone through the various systems that we could approach this, and I think at our workshop about a year ago, we chose to do something innovative and simple that wasn't going to cost a whole bunch of money for consultants. We've been on that merry-go-round for the comparators, and we could go that route again if we want, but this brings it to a number that that seem to be resonating amongst some directors. It's in the range of about $45,000. It can be done through, and this only affects electoral area directors, and it only affects the electoral area function 250. So there will be no impact to the municipal partners on the board. I'm recommending in this that for the purposes of 2020 alone, that it be funded through operational reserves. We currently are in excess of the maximum in operational reserves that are required for Function 250. There is another request for funds from that, but even with that request and this change of about $100,000, we would still be within the range that it's recommended for a reserve fund policy. And lastly, well, maybe not lastly, but I would suggest that this become effective April 1st of 2020. It can easily be absorbed within the budget. And just as a matter of information, I requested of staff what this increased cost would be to a taxpayer if we were to implement this, and just some calculations and discussions with staff yesterday and confirming with Mr. Kieber today. It would run around $100,000 per annum, which when divided up amongst the electoral areas, I believe the factor was 88 cents per 100,000. So for an average home in an electoral area, we'd be talking about $4 to $5 increase per year to cover this. So I think this is a somewhat bold step that we might be making if we endorse this and recommend this to the board. I think it's overdue. The last board was charged with tackling this area, and it didn't. It passed it on to us. I think it's overdue, and I'd ask you to support this and put this to bed and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no wish to alienate any of the directors on this board, and I do recognize that we should be paid fairly for the work that we do and to attract a wider spectrum of candidates. I agree that the EADs are due an increase in their annual remuneration. But given the circumstances of many others in affordability and constant taxation increases, I am morally and ethically torn in this debate with regard to magnitude only. I will be voicing my support for option 3 in the staff report later on. The biggest problem that we have and other jurisdictions have is affordability. and this was confirmed by the recent satisfaction survey, such as it was. Part of my volunteer work is at the Cobble Hill Seniors bi-monthly lunch, and we provide a 3-course meal to seniors, over 100 every 2 weeks. Cost is only $5, but we have seniors coming along who are searching in their purses, in change, to pay that $5. We never, ever turn anyone away for lack of funds. We do not insist on payment. An increase of this magnitude equates to nearly 30%, which has no precedent in local government anywhere that I can find. I'm going to voice my support for options 3 in the staff report, together with an immediate increase for the EADs of approximately $3,000 per annum, plus the annual CPI increases thereafter. You will also see that there was a letter came from the Arbutus Ridge Residents Association, ARA, which says they support, and there is support in the community for a rise in our remuneration, not of this amount. It's too much, it's immoral, and it's unethical. I cannot ever support something of that magnitude for the reasons that I've given already.
Director Stone.
Right on the heels of such a passionate speech. I actually did some comparator research and had noticed that there was a really broad move around the province to increase electoral area director remuneration. Right now, for example, RDN exceeds ours by about a few $1,000s a year, but there's also $125 additional per every committee meeting. So if you look at our schedules and you started to add that up, you would be in a relative ballpark to what's being suggested in the resolution that's brought forward. CRD directors, again, in the electoral area directors, in the ballpark of what's been put on the table here. So if we did look at the comparators, some of the other regional districts would pull it down, but I do note that they are also in the process of reviewing remuneration. And I also want to reflect on the characteristics of our electoral areas as it is relative to other electoral areas. Many of us recognize that if you go to the interior or the north of the province, the electoral areas there are very, very different than the more urbanized electoral areas that we have here. I often hear that the electoral areas directors don't have the supports of municipal council. For example, Area B has a population slightly larger than Ladysmith. We have a full complement of staff, resources for council. Now, of course, we budgeted for those, hint, hint, EA directors. But we have those resources available to us and the support of an entire council of 6 people to support myself as the mayor. So I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but given the unique characteristics and the reality that essentially you are mayors without councils, and you know, your support comes in a very different form, and the difficulty of electoral area governance just by its nature. I watched your strategic planning session with a mixture of fascination and horror because it's so difficult, and that's a compliment to all of you. I tweeted out that day how proud I was to watch you guys work in that session, and I appreciate that there's different perspectives around the board, but I'm wholeheartedly happy to support what's been brought forward by Director Morrison and speak to it and champion that conversation as the chair of the board if that's necessary. And I think it's time, and when I look at what this board does, what our electoral area directors do, I think that that's more than fair compensation.
I don't think I have anyone on the list. Oh, Director. Director Smith, Toporotsky. I'll insert myself after Director Stone, if that's okay. I'll be supporting this motion. I think the amount of responsibility that's put on a director is quite large, and I agree with what Director Wilson said. Is we to be able to attract more people at the table, and we just finished talking about the role description, to attract somebody who's available any time of the week It's a huge responsibility. We had a workshop around this with, I believe it was maybe the last board, and we said we would be bold, or maybe it was just after this board. We said we would be bold. I'm willing to be bold. I have never actually had a member of the public say anything about that we're remunerated too much. They've always said, wow, that's not enough. And we don't have the kind of support that we have, that a municipality would have and so we're often doing a lot of those roles ourselves. And I would support even more, but of course I'm not gonna have that at this table. So I'll be supporting this motion and happy to also champion it. And I know that electoral area directors do a lot. Thank you. Director Smith.
Thank you. I will also be supporting this. I definitely think that when I was running for the position and anyone asked me, how much money will you receive? I said, I have no idea. I'm running because I believe in you as a community and that we are headed in that direction. So I think it's really important that possibly that the communities actually know how much we are paid as electoral area directors. And if you take off the amount that we receive to be at the CVRD board tables, we put in a lot of time for $14,000 a year. And I think the North Cowichan council members receive more than that, but we shouldn't compare ourselves with others. Our position is different, our job is different, our times are different. As it was pointed out, we're a mayor without a council, and you know, it would be nice if you had somebody who could give you a hand sometimes, but a lot of the time you don't have that, and you just have to make do. And we all support each other as electoral area directors here to sort of create that council of assistance for each other. So I will be supporting this. I think that this is, yes, a bold move, but it's not a over-the-top bold move. It's just bringing fairness into the position so that others will be able to follow in our footsteps as we move forward.
Thank you. I have Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so when this thing came forward, I was like, cringing, you know, because it's a very uncomfortable thing to talk about. And, you know, what the public thinks about, you know, always talking about giving ourselves a raise or whatever. But, you know, like I said earlier, 10 years ago, the political spectrum was a lot different, and now times are changing. I think in these positions that we run for, we have a lot of public pressure. And not only that, we're going to add on to federal and provincial downloads, and CVRD directors are going to be feeling that because of the climate change. And UNDRIP. UNDRIP is unfolding, and we're going to have to, you know, work with each other in moving forward in these times of change. And it's going to take a lot of time commitment. And again, it's one of those things where when I started to think about running for the municipal election, the joke was, oh, it's a minimum of 20 hours per week. So believe me, it's not a minimum of 20 hours a week, because there's a lot of pressures, there's a lot of meetings that we have to start catching up with, because like I said, you know, fire, drought, flooding, all of these different things that are happening and unfolding in our communities, that we're in crisis mode in trying to put that together. We do, like I noticed being at this table, watching the CVRD directors, they do have the staff support, but really they're the face in the front line, in the trenches with their constituents in their communities, and that's what we are. Like we're the ones that get yelled at or sent emails, and you know, and it still happens, like when you're making choices, so, and moving forward. So I know I will listen to the rest of the conversation. Thanks.
Director Staple.
So, one of the things about this that has come up a few times is talking about, you know, the salaries of the people here. I mean, at least as the municipal directors, we're not directly talking about something that impacts us. This isn't a raise to everyone around the table. And so I think that that needs to be, you know, reminded of and made clear to the public as well. And part of that, as a municipal director who's here, is I feel that, you know, I do have ability to look at this differently, at least in the eyes of the public, all the municipal directors. So in supporting you in what you're asking for, it's important that you're recognized for what you do in this way, because we are living in a time, as it has been brought up, that is so different than it was even 5 years ago, in terms of the expectations on people, and also in terms of the projected growth for our community, in terms of the, you know, I mean, in Director Acton's community, you have, you know, more than double the people that we have in the city. And so that's huge, right? And yet those conversations around what that actually means, what is the worth and the value of someone doing this work in the community, should not ever be something that that we don't support, because everyone here puts in more hours than we can even describe. These are not positions that you can describe to people through a job descriptions or through anything else. And so, as a municipal director, I just want everyone to recognize that, you know, that I appreciate everything that you do, recognize it, fully support you in this, and this is not an easy conversation for you to have, because you're asking for something for yourselves. But we're not, and so as a municipal director, I completely support you in what you need, and recognize that this isn't about, you know, going out and trying to take more than you deserve for what you do. This is about recognizing the value of what is contributed, and the reality of the roles.
Thank you. I have Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to reiterate that I recognize again, and I do support a rise for this board, and for the work that we do, and again to attract the wider spectrum. But there's two things, and one of the things that maybe Director Stone can answer in a minute, about what the recent rise was for the Ladysmith councillors, at what kind of magnitude that was. But I'm going to throw three numbers out there to you, just so we can think. And don't get me wrong, I do support a rise. It's the magnitude that I have a problem with here. Three numbers. The first one is 30%, as I mentioned before, which is 30% of the 33 grand we get paid at the moment. Let's go to another number, 80%. That's the number that is being proposed here to increase the EAD's portion from 15,000 to 25,000 or thereabouts. And then the third number is 0.5%. That's the amount that the CPP went up by this year. If Director Stone could maybe let us know what the Ladysmith rise equated to, I'd appreciate that as well. Thank you.
I don't know that that's relevant, because, okay, but it's also, I think it would be considered new business item, but just for giggles, let's hear it.
I think that's a fair question. So a population smaller than Shawnigan Lake's elected officials are $139,000 total. So for comparative sake, if we're going to be honest about it, an area the same size as Shawnigan Lake, the elected officials get paid $139,000, $43,000 for the mayor, $16,000 times 6 councillors. So for people in Ladysmith, a population of 9,000 people, they pay $139,000 for their elected officials. Compare that to a place like Shawnigan Lake, and we're talking about $43,000 for their elected leadership. So I get it, but if we want to break it down by population, even our lowest population electoral area per resident are going to be paying significantly less than a community like Ladysmith for their elected officials. So I get the perspective, but I'm just trying to say there's another way to look at it. I think that you all, as electoral area directors, and I can say this without prejudice, provide an amazing value to your community. It's a big stress. I can feel it in some of the emails that I read sometimes. It's a lot of weight to bear, and there needs to be not only a recognition of the time you spend, but also that weight. You guys do amazing work and you need to be compensated for it. You opened the door, I had to go through it.
I have Director Morrison next.
Given I've spoken, I would yield to Director Sebring if I'm next on the list after him.
Director Sebring is not next. Next, we have Director Kuhn, Yanni DiNardo, then Sebring.
Okay, well then, I'll take my spot.
Director Kuhn.
This issue has been discussed for over a year now. I understand in the meantime, increases have taken place in other areas, in other regional districts. If we don't support this motion now, what we're most likely going to be faced with is we'll be faced with the same issue again next year, because by that time, many of the other regions will have had sizable increases in their remuneration for the area directors. So I can't see, 30% sounds like a lot. When you think that we didn't have an increase for quite a while, and that the other regional districts are looking at increases now, we'll be faced with the same issue again. If we go for a small increase, we'll be faced with the same issue again next year. And that would be a horror to me. We should get it over with, and then we're set for the next several years, and that's fine.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to acknowledge Director Staples for her thoughtful comments and the support, and I really appreciate that. So I just had to make that comment. I just wanted to do it publicly. Sorry.
Okay. Love Fest. Anyone else? That was so nice. Yes. Director Sebring.
Madam Chair, I apologize that I'm late. Somehow this meeting showed up in my calendar at noon, not 11 a.m., so I had another engagement. There's a couple of things here that concern me. I won't oppose the motion. It's an EA director's motion, and it affects the EA directors, but a couple of things. One, to best practice. Generally speaking, when political bodies vote for pay increases, they don't vote for pay increases for themselves. They do it for the next term. They do it for subsequent to the next election. That way, if the voters are upset, they're free to express that at election time. But it's a slightly different paradigm. There's a perception. I'm not suggesting this is the wrong thing to do, but there can be a perception out there that this is done with self-interest, and I just want to make you aware of that. The second piece goes to the municipal remuneration, and I know that's not on the table, but if this motion passes, the gap between municipal and EA directors will go up considerably. And again, I'm fine with that. I've said publicly before, I have no problem with the remuneration we get here right now. But if we think long-term, perhaps we might want to consider, and not today, but we might want to consider at some point saying, you know what, as a matter of policy, we're going to tie municipal director salaries to EA director salaries at 50% or whatever, so that we just have a ratio and that it works through that way so that it's kind of automatic. Because the gap that will come through here now it's more than double. I mean, at 19.3 for municipal directors, and the proposal for basically 45 for EA directors is well over double. And I acknowledge they do double the work. So I don't begrudge the EA directors this at all, and I'm going to vote in favor of it. But I'm just saying that those are the two things that we should think about as we proceed down this road. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Morrison.
So, and to Director Sebring's point, the last board punted to this one when the last board could have dealt with it. So I'm going to ask that the question be called.
Is there any more discussion? I'll call the question. Do we need to read the question again, or everyone's clear? You have it in front of you. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Director Wilson opposes. The motion carries.
Yeah, and
Director
Just a quick
Morrison,
question, will this go forward to this afternoon's board meeting?
can this go,
Yes.
does it have to go to today's?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Point of clarification, Madam Chair. If you wish this recommendation to go forward to this afternoon's board meeting, then I would need a recommendation to that effect.
Do we have a recommendation? Oh, here we go. Mr. Keeber, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So since the funds are coming out of the operating reserves, there is no need to include it in the budget amendment or the bylaw that's being adopted today. So you don't have to do that motion.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Keeber. So there's not necessary to do it
Could if we wanted.
for tonight. We could if we wanted to, but I don't
Fair enough.
think we need to.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to next order of business.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next order of business is information. There is none. Unfinished business, there is none. New business, there is none. Question period.
We're on question period. No questions for the chair. And I'll move for a close, to adjourn the meeting. All in favor? Thank you. See you at 2.